here today with Professor Ha-Joon Chang from Cambridge University to discuss his new book, 23 Things They Don't Tell You About Capitalism. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So there are 23 things.
Right, yeah.
But as I read your book, the first and foremost is there is no separating politics and economics.
That's right.
There is a market, and the market depends upon customs and the state and many other things. Please explain.
Exactly, yeah. No, I mean, I put it deliberately in a provocative way and say that there is no such thing as a free market. So a lot of people, when they read that, say, well, I mean, you may or may not like free market, but you know what is a free market. I mean, you know at least when you see one, if not being able to theoretically define it. But actually, all markets are propped up by a range of regulations on who can participate, what can be bought and sold, how the exchange is going to be conducted. So, for example, you supposedly have a free labor market in America, but you ban child labor. You cannot hire slaves, and there are all sorts of regulations on how many hours people can work and so on. And I mean, all these things have been developed over the years through court rulings and political struggle and institutional reform. So we don't think American labor market is very heavily regulated only because we accept the existing regulations so much that we don't actually see them.
We're not conscious.
Exactly, yeah. So in that sense, the standard assertion by free market economists that market boundaries are scientifically defined, any attempt to kind of meddle with it is wrong, is completely misleading, because what they see as the correct boundary of the market is as politically motivated or as politically motivated as anyone else is. So it's not like, you have this pure scientific position called free market economics, and all the other people who want to use the government to regulate and control things are the people who don't know anything about economics, people who are motivated by the political things.
Most people, when you buy something, believe you should be able to call the police if somebody wants to take it and not pay for it.
Exactly. Yeah,
that's a regulation.
Yeah, actually, the one interesting personal experience was when I first went to Britain as a young graduate student back in the 1980s. Korea was a fairly poor country, and probably except in the most exclusive department stores, when you bought something, you just couldn't return it, even if there was the change of your mind, unless it was grossly faulty. The shop owners will say, no, we are not doing that. Today is normal, but at the time it was quite exceptional. So when I first arrived in Britain, I was very shocked that you could actually buy something and then go back to the shop and say, I've changed my mind. Even things like that, that we take for granted. But actually,
I don't know how my wife or daughter would shop if they couldn't take back clothes that didn't fit or didn't look right.
Yeah. Yeah. So fundamentally, the point I try to make with this rather kind of outrageous sounding proposition is to tell people that this myth of market objectivity, i.e., market is something that can be scientifically defined and you shouldn't touch it with politics, is fundamentally misleading.
Let's move from free markets to free trade. And you talked about in the book infant industry protection and the nature of success through trade.
That's right, yeah. Thing 7 says there's few countries are going to become rich through free trade. And of course, that this is completely counter to the mainstream belief these days that all countries that have become rich have done so through free trade and free market. But actually, when you look at the history of capitalism, actually there are very few countries that have become rich through free trade and free market policies. I mean, there was the Netherlands in the 18th century, and Hong Kong, if you can call it a country, in the 20th century. But apart from that, even countries like Britain and the United States, countries which people think invented free trade, were actually very protectionist in the early days when they needed to catch up with other people. A lot of Americans think that this is the country of the free trade and free enterprise, but probably a few of them have known that between 1830 and the end of the Second World War, the United States had the highest industrial tariff rate in the world. It is a country where the theory of so-called infant industry protection, this argument that relatively backward economies need to protect and nurture their young producers against competition from superior producers abroad. This idea was actually first theorized by none other than the first Treasury Secretary of this country, Alexander Hamilton, in his famous report to the Congress on the subject of manufacturers, submitted in 1791. So there are a lot of myths about how free trade was central to the development of capitalism. Of course, international trade is central, but that is not the same as saying that free trade is central. So that this confusion between the importance of trade and importance of free trade, I think, is at the root of a lot of the problems these days. Because, for example, the World Bank, the IMF, and various donor governments have tried to impose free trade policies on developing countries when they need a period of protection and nurturing. And in the last 30 years, a lot of developing countries have liberalized their trade, and in most countries, economic growth has collapsed, and their industries have been dying. So it's not just getting history right. These historical issues have great bearings on what we do today.
Well, we have a period of history right now where the buyer of last resort since World War II has been the United States, and the American consumers, with the breakdown in consumer credit, the housing overhang, looks a bit exhausted. And with that, you have the export-led growth economies, second, third, and fourth largest in the world, China, Japan, and Germany. Where are they going to sell to if America is not that buyer of last resort? How are they going to reorient their production?
That's right. Yeah, there has been just too much emphasis on export-led growth. But if everyone is engaged in export-led growth, then you have no one to buy the stuff. So there's a fundamental
we need dollars to become a consumer.
Exactly, fundamental logical problem there. But it's something that can be relatively easily reoriented in rich countries like Germany and Japan. But I think it's a different proposition for a poor country like China. I say this because consumption also needs infrastructure. In order to increase consumption, you need shopping malls, you need credit cards, you need the factoring services by car companies and so on. And all these things require substantial physical investment and institution building. So in a country like China, this is not going to be easy. Maybe they can threaten to hang people for not consuming, but it's not going to happen. So this rebalancing is a critical issue, but I think it will have to be done mainly by countries like Germany and Japan, and it will take some time before China can take that role, because at the moment it just cannot consume enough because of these structural constraints. Another problem in China is that the welfare state is so underdeveloped. People save like mad because they have no safety net, and they feel that they have to save everything in the case something happens to them. So that unless you improve the welfare system in China, I mean, these people are not going to stop saving, and that's another constraint on Chinese consumption. So you have quite an obstacle there.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about free markets and free trade. One of the big things in the crisis of 2008 and thereafter is the question of free capital mobility and the question of the functioning of capital markets. I know in your book you write about the relationship between the stock market and corporate governance, and you talk about not all value is being represented when stockholder value is being represented.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I once again try to kind of make my readers think about it more by putting it provocatively. I say companies should not be run in the interest of their owners. Now, a lot of people, I mean, find it shocking because, you know, we have been told, especially in the last 20, 30 years of finance-driven capitalism, that shareholders own the company. They have the long-term interest of the company in their mind. If you maximize value for the shareholders, I mean, it is good for the company, which is in turn good for the overall economy. But actually, you know, this proposition is that in a way at the root of our problem, because in modern liability, in modern limited liability companies with dispersed ownership, I mean, hundreds of thousands of shareholders, I mean, maybe sometimes even millions of shareholders, individual shareholders do not have an incentive to wait for the long-term result. You know, I mean, they, despite being the legal owners, paradoxically are the least committed to the long-term future of the company because they find it the easiest to leave. Yeah?
The liquid secondary market.
Exactly, yeah. So the other stakeholders in the companies are like the employees and the suppliers and the local community and the consumers and so on. You know, they find it more difficult to leave because, I mean, if you're a supplier to, I don't know, General Motors, and then suddenly you don't like that company, you want to start supplying Honda, I mean, they are not going to take you in like that, whereas shareholders can sell the shares at the, you know, the click of a mouse, so to speak. Yeah? So this is, especially with financial deregulation in the last 3 decades, this has given enormous power to the floating shareholders. I mean, these are the people who own tiny bits of the company with no long-term commitment. So much so that we have run, especially in this country and in the United Kingdom, we have run the companies basically in the name of shareholder value maximization, which basically involves not investing for the long term. Yeah? Because the easiest way to boost your profit is not to do anything that brings results 5-10 years later. Yeah? So you don't invest in machinery, you don't invest in research and development, you don't invest in training, you just hold the cash, yeah? And then distribute a lot of that through dividends. You know, in the 1970s, only about 35 to 45% of American corporate profit was given out as dividends. These days, it's at over 60%. Yeah? So, I mean, the companies have less cash to invest, and then they cannot even use all of that for investment because now you have to do share buybacks to prop up share prices. And you know, share buybacks accounted for only about 5% of American corporate profit in the 1980s. Today is, you know, often more than 100%. So actually, you are not using any of this profit for the long-term productivity development. You are just keeping it. So you can go. Yeah, you are just using it to keep the shareholders happy.
Yeah, so you can go buy your own private island.
Exactly.
Not worry about the future.
You know, I mean, I don't mind people buying 10 private islands if their productive contribution is big enough. Yeah? but I mean, these things have been done without actually doing anything for long-term future of the companies, and there lies the central problem.
What's the old saying in finance? IBG, UBG? I'll
What's
be
that?
gone, you'll be gone.
Well, you know, yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, you write a book to puncture myths, and you also teach economics.
Yeah.
What would you like to see imparted to students, to young people who will view this telecast, about economics and economics education?
No, actually, you know, economics is a great subject. You know, I mean, it really enables you to understand the most fundamental aspect of modern society, i.e., the productive sector and how it works. But unfortunately, in the last 3-4 decades, the subject has become more and more detached from the real world, and more, and indeed recently excessive emphasis have been put on the techniques. So actually now a lot of students are lost. You know, I mean, they are taught all these techniques, but then they don't know why they are doing it. Yeah?
Yeah, they don't
and
recognize the world.
Exactly, only in the last semester, they are told that, well, this might apply to these kind of things. Yeah. In the real world. So I think we have to teach it the other way around. You have to teach the students some basic knowledge about the real world. You know, I mean, how many students these days can tell you what is the per capita income of the United States? Yeah? What is the size of the Chinese economy? You know, the people don't know these things. Yeah. So you need to teach them the basic, if you like, the economic landscape, and teach them the basic the economic problems. Yeah? I mean, unemployment, financial regulation, international trade, and what are the policy issues? What are the issues that create all this conflict and debate and so on? And then you have to teach them, well, in order to understand these problems, you need to learn these techniques and so on. Unfortunately, today, by the time the students acquire all these techniques, they have lost interest in the real world. So they become autistic mathematicians, if you like. So I think, no, I'm not against mathematics. I mean,
It's a tool.
Yeah,
It's
an
useful
absolutely crucial tool in economics. But I heard from a Norwegian friend that in Norway there's a saying that he who has a hammer sees everything as a nail. Yeah? So if you teach people how to use a hammer before teaching them what is a good house, what is the function of a house, why do you want to build house that in the harmony with the environment and those kind of the fundamental things. Yeah, of course, there are some fundamental theoretical things that we need to fix. I mean, for example, this inability to distinguish between calculable risk and fundamental uncertainty, which makes rational calculation impossible, especially in the financial market. I mean, unless we fix that theory, we are not going to solve problems in the financial market. I mean, we also need to re-examine various theories of human motivation in economics. I mean, the prevalent view that everything that human beings do, maybe except to their own children and immediate family, is driven by self-interest. I mean, that is being questioned, but we need to question it in a more fundamental way. So there are some important theoretical issues there, but I would say that in pedagogical terms, what is more urgent is to actually tell students how relevant economics is, how relevant it can be, and motivate them to learn these techniques by teaching them what kind of techniques that can be useful in solving what kind of problems and re-examining what kind of issues. Because these days, frankly, a lot of students lose interest in the subject in the first, say, the semester, because they are taught all these abstract theory which has no obvious relevance for what they think they were going to study when they study economics.
Yeah, have model looking for problem to apply it to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
you.
Pleasure to talk with you.